Hey, welcome to No Code MBA, and welcome to our event with Mike Heap, the co-founder of No Code AI Model Builder, which is a no-code tool that allows you to fine-tune your own OpenAI models and use it in your own web applications. And in this video, you're going to see Mike demo how to use his no-code tool to create your own fine-tuned model. You'll also learn a lot more about the best practices of fine-tuning with AI, and also just learn what fine-tuning is. So if you're brand new to fine-tuning with AI, this video is going to be a great intro for you to learn about how to get started.
So to kick it off, Mike, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're building in the AI space?
Yeah, sure. So my background is kind of a bit higgledy-piggledy, a bit all over the place. I started off working kind of in a big four professional services firm, Ernst & Young, and then did that for 9 years in a variety of roles. Actually trained as an accountant. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I left to basically work on more like product management roles and also work on building my own tech products. This is the kind of latest one that we've been working on. We started the no code builder actually just before Christmas, and it's built with no code, so we live and die by no code. And it came about basically because me and my co-founder Alex both got really into kind of playing around with GPT-3. We'd actually started building our own products, which was a way to help university students write their personal statements for when they go to university. And we figured out the best way to do that, rather than coming up with like really creative prompts, was actually to use this technique called fine tuning, which we assumed kind of a lot of other people were aware of and knew about, but it came to pass that they weren't. And so what we did was we fed in like 900 different personal statements into this fine-tuning API, which I'll talk you all through later. And it was able to generate much better results than we would be able to through prompting alone. And so we tried that out a little bit. OpenAI actually told us that we had to take it down because they thought it was defrauding educational systems. So we took that down. And then what we then started to realize was that there were so many use cases for AI and building kind of more custom things that we couldn't decide where we wanted to kind of place our bets. And so at that point, we thought, well, why don't we kind of not place our bets in any specific category, and why don't we just be the kind of infrastructure or pipes behind that and help other people build things? And that to us was kind of more of a fulfilling and fruitful path, because we get to see everyone else build all these amazing things and get to help them do that. So I think that's kind of, it's a very like fulfilling thing to be working on at the moment. So yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. That all sounds really cool. And maybe as a starting point for people who aren't as familiar with fine tuning, could you explain what it is and kind of what's the difference between fine tuning and prompting and kind of who it's for, who it's not for?
Yeah, for sure. So fine tuning you can think of as a way to refine another model. So if you were to use GPT-3, so the usual playground that you can access through OpenAI for free, that's a generic model. So if you're to ask it a question, it can give you a good response. And if you're really to work on your prompts and things and play about with some of the parameters or hyperparameters, then you can get relatively good output. But it's only good to a certain extent. If you really want to get a proper output that's usable, and something that is going to satisfy like your 95th percentile case, etc., then you want to use fine tuning. So the way to get the most out of a model, you can either fine tune it, you can use prompts, or you can use parameters. Generally, you use a combination of all three of those. If you've used ChatGPT, which is kind of like GPT 3.5, I guess, so like a higher level model, you're probably very familiar with prompting. You've probably seen lots of people writing out these really extensive prompts. And you can get some pretty good result with that. But actually the real powerful results are when you kind of use that fine tuning in combination with prompts and parameters. So you can kind of think of it as like these three components to producing the best output from your model. So we'll talk a little bit about parameters and prompting later, but for the fine tuning, you can think of it as you've got this generic model. I want to skew the output of the model to a more specific use case. And therefore, it's kind of like adding on some additional layers of training that make it more likely to give you results that are in line with the data that you've input in the first place. So as an example of that, if you were to, in fact, shall I just show you an example of that? That's probably easiest. Is that okay, Seth?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, so can everyone see this? I'll assume yes. So
You can comment in the right side if you can't see it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right. So this is what we used for our UCAS statement builder, so our university statement builder. So we had a site. It's a bit slow because using the internet, but basically we've got this long prompt. So it's saying write a personal statement for a student studying law. What their interests are. They have an interest in the legal system. They've captained their cricket club, which is a sport in the UK, if you're aware. And at the moment, we're just on this generic Da Vinci model. So if we just click submit here, then we're going to get a result that is okay, but it's kind of just repurposing a lot of what is already in the above bit. So it's kind of just saying what your A levels are, which is kind of copying it from here. It's again just kind of like repurposing and restating a lot of these things. Now, if we were to actually use our fine-tune model, so this is something that we've created based on 900 different university personal statements. So we came up with loads of prompts to say, you're a student studying X, you have an interest in Y, loads of different bits of points of detail in the prompt. And then the completion would have been their actual personal statement that got them into university at the time. So we run them all through, fine tune on that data. And then you can see when I've selected this model here, this is my fine tune model. So this is a specific one that only I can see. So it's Da Vinci with a few more layers on top, which are the fine tuning. So now if I hit submit, then hopefully I should get something that's written out a bit more as if it's an actual personal statement. So you can see here that it's written more in the style of a student writing. Their insatiable curiosity of how the world works. You can see that they're talking about like a work experience placement with a solicitor in inheritance law. So it's much more in line with the way that a student would write a personal statement. As another quick example, if you wanted to say write a tweet. So there's an example where I've just put write a tweet about AI startups or product management, which is basically the kind of stuff that I would tweet about. So again, we're on the generic Da Vinci model here. If we just hit submit, so you can see the key to success in hashtag startups in using hashtag AI to make smart decisions, drive hashtag, lots of hashtags basically. That's what GPT-3 thinks of as Twitter. And you can see it's not a very high quality kind of output. So one thing that we did was we created a model that is trained on my own tweets, so my last kind of 300 tweets. We did a bit of filtering on it, and you can see now that this is similar to something that I would write, and it gives me a much better output of something that would be more realistic. So it's talk about how many days it's going to be till I reach startup goal. I want to be working on my business full time by July. So it's already given a much better output than if I were to just have used the generic model, even with like a good degree of prompting. So it means you can really reduce the detail in your prompts. And actually, for our tweet writer, the prompt is effectively just write a tweet. But because it takes all the fine-tuned data and has some specific parameters to it, it gives way better output than you would see just by playing around with prompts and things there. I guess one way of looking at it is to say that when you're writing a prompt, you're trying to interpret and recreate how you do something, whereas with fine tuning, you're just showing it how you do it, and then it can learn what your style is and what your voice is and things. So yeah, so I think that's probably the easiest way of kind of explaining how it works. Does that make sense?
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, if anyone has any questions about that, just drop them into the Q&A tab here. If you have any issues with audio or something, drop that into the session chat. We can try and help. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Mike. And another benefit here of fine tuning is if there's a limit to the kind of to reiterate on like the token limits that OpenAI has. Do you want to talk maybe a little more about the token limits and kind of how fine tuning can help with that constraint?
Yeah, so obviously when you're crafting a prompt, you want as detailed a prompt as possible, but more detail often means that you're using more tokens, more text in order to generate that prompt. And so you could end up with like a 3,000 character prompt or something that gets your output, but then you don't have much left for the completion of the message. So instead, if you're fine tuning, then you're kind of embedding all of that knowledge already into the model that you're using. So therefore your prompt can be super short and your output, you can have a larger, longer output as well. So it's good for kind of token efficiency, I guess.
Cool. Awesome. Do you want to go ahead maybe now and demo no code AI model builder to give everyone an idea of how that works, and then we can hop back to questions afterwards?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so basically, in this case, the first thing that you'd have to do before you use the builder, you have to use your OpenAI key. I won't show you kind of how to do that. It's pretty self-explanatory. You get just so you're aware, you get 5 OpenAI keys. We walk you through kind of how to do it, how to add them. You probably want to make sure that you use a specific one just for us, just to make sure that you can revoke it if you need to. And it's always a good idea to set soft and hard limits on your account to ensure that you kind of don't go into an overspend accidentally for whatever reason. We obviously also encrypt all our API keys to kind of bank grade security level. That's the kind of boring bit out of the way. So the process is actually super simple. So if you weren't to use this builder, you would end up having to submit like curl requests. You would have to do things in the terminal, all things that, to be honest, I have no idea how to do. The reason we built this was because I was constantly asking my co-founder to do these slightly more technical things for me. And so all I wanted to be able to do was just upload like a CSV file, so similar to an Excel file, and train based on that. So effectively, that's what you can do. So what you do is we give you a template of a Google Sheets file, but you could use a Microsoft Excel file either. You have a prompt and a completion. And so this is the data that you would put in. So this is like just some sample data. So you'd clear this, clear all that out, and then you put in your data. For the prompt, you would want to think about what's the prompt that you're going to use in the actual model, because it should be a similar thing. So for example, for this is a data set of kind of really bad jokes. And what we have here is kind of the start of the joke or the joke question, and then the joke completion or response in the completion. So if you were doing, say, a chatbot, and you wanted to kind of train a chatbot on your own customer support data, then you could use a prompt here of the question that the customer asked, and a completion of the response from the customer support agent. If you wanted to do a blog written in your own style, then you can have a prompt of either a generic blog post that's been rewritten into your style in the completion, or you could use a prompt of write a blog post with this title and these topics, and then the completion would be the example blog post that you've written. You could also do things like for our Tweet Me product, we created a prompt just saying, write an interesting tweet from user X. And the completion was an example of those tweets that they might have written. So it's worth thinking about, like, what is the form of the completion that you want, so you can work out what's the prompt that you're going to need to get there. And if anyone needs kind of help with that, they can just like kind of get in touch. There's actually not a lot of information out there on like how to best structure data for fine tuning and things. And we've actually set up a Discord group that you can join if you're interested in kind of talking about best practices for these types of things. But the idea is, yeah, pretty simple. You have your prompts, you have your completion. You probably want a few hundred examples of this. Obviously, the more varied the prompts are, the more examples you probably need. So for example, if your prompt is the same every time and your completion varies, then it will learn faster than if your prompt is different every time. So it has a much smaller pool of data from which to kind of match the two things. Effectively, each time you're saying, like, how can it learn how to answer this prompt with this completion? That's kind of how you want to think about it. So you download the CSV, add any data that you have, so the prompt and completion. Then once you've done that, I think OpenAI recommend, depending on the use case, I think their kind of rough figure is about 500 examples for good quality kind of completions. But we've seen like pretty good success with 200 or fewer. So then once you've got that, you just have to go to the upload your data. So it's just a file upload button. Or if you just want to try it out with some of our bad jokes data, you can just click this button. Then once that's uploaded, you click upload. Then the next stage is to actually create your model. So it's not free to fine tune. It is like a nominal cost effectively, but we'll always tell you what that cost is before you actually use the product. So you can see here, it's just under $1 to train on 393 examples. You can actually bring those costs down as well if you did want to use, say, another model. So currently you can see we're using DaVinci, which is the most powerful of the 4 OpenAI models, but you can also use Curie, Babbage, or Ada. Basically, as you go from D back to A, the performance of the model decreases, but some models are better for working on different use cases. So I think Ada is almost as good as DaVinci for things like classification problems. So that's where you want to, maybe you want to do a sentiment analysis, or you want to bucket something into a certain group. Then you've also got the number of epochs that you want to train on. So this basically says how many times through the data set do you need to train something. So if you've got a smaller data set, then you might want to go through a few more times. One thing to bear in mind, that it can mean that you can over-index on certain things. So one of the things we found when we were building Tweet Me was that when we used 4 epochs as opposed to 2, any tweets that someone would tweet more than once suddenly came out all the time. And so that was basically because it was like oversampling on certain examples. So we tell you how much it's going to be. You can then rename your model. And then for us, you can either train on 10 lines of data, which will basically, it won't give you a great model, but it will show you the process of how it works and you can see how to use it. That's free. Or if you want to train on kind of unlimited lines of data, that's $10. Or if you wanted to use it every month, as many models, as many lines as you want, and that's $40 a month. Once you've done all that, so all we've had to do is upload a file effectively. We can rename it if we want, but we just uploaded a file, click create AI model, and then that then gets sent off to OpenAI. We will only hold your data as long as the model is incomplete. So once the model is complete, we delete it. We don't want to hold it. We don't want to see like what you're working on. We only want to keep it as long as it's helpful to help you resolve problems. This has now gone to OpenAI. It varies quite a lot depending on kind of OpenAI's usage at any time. So it can take anywhere between 15 minutes and 3 hours to actually get back, but we'll email you as soon as it's complete. And then once it's complete, then you can kind of use it however you want. So we give a few tips on how to use it. So you can just click use this model. And then within here, you can see how we used it in the playground. So we have a little GIF that shows you how to access it there, and what you need to use for things like stop sequences and things like that. Or if you wanted to use it via API, so maybe you've got another product that you already want to call in, you can use that. Or if you're more focused on Zapier or Make, then we also show you how you can use it there if you wanted to output it somewhere else. So this will probably take a little while, so it's not going to complete, but the examples of like how it works on the other side are things like this. So you can see how to use it here. Then once you've got kind of your output, so you want to start by spending as much time as you can getting good input fine-tuning data. So spend a good amount of time on your CSV, making sure that you've got really good high-quality examples. It's been really curated. Then goes off, gets fine-tuned, comes back with your model. Then the next thing that you want to do is spend time tweaking these parameters. So depending on what your use case is, you'll want to tweak different parameters. Probably the main ones you want to focus on are probably temperature. So this is, if you're not already aware, this is kind of the creativity dial. So as you go up to 1, then you get more creative answers than 0. So if you were to put the temperature at 0, it basically means that every time you ask the question or use the prompt, it's going to give you exactly the same answer. Whereas when you go take the temperature up to 1, then it can create things that maybe don't even exist. So for example, if you wanted to ask for a name of animals, if your temperature was at 0, it might just come back dog, dog, dog. If it goes up to 1, then it might come up with like a hybrid platypus unicorn or something like that. If you generally also only want to vary either top P or temperature, this isn't a very good example, but effectively you want to keep one of them at 1 and vary the other. But top P is again another form of kind of getting more variability or creativity into answers. And then they're probably the main ones that you'll want to play with. Frequency penalty and presence penalty can also be useful. So frequency penalty basically says like how many times is the completion allowed to use certain words. So for example, if you put a really high penalty on your frequency penalty, then that would mean that it can't repeat certain, it shouldn't be repeating certain words. So for example, if you had a frequency penalty of 2, I think it can go up to, then it has to keep coming up with new ways of saying things or new ways of using words, which can mean you end up with a lot of jargon and gibberish come out. Because if there's a word like the that it can't reuse, for example, then it has to keep coming up with thus and all sorts of other things. Presence penalty is similar, but it's more about the topics or the concepts that are being spoken about. So, for example, if you're doing a blog post, you might want to be really focused on one topic, in which case you probably want to penalize. Do you want to penalize presence penalty? It's going to penalize. You can't. Yeah. So you basically want a high presence penalty if you want a really creative blog post, and you want a low presence penalty if you wanted something to just talk about the same thing all the time potentially. So again, it plays into like what's your use case. If you making a chatbot, for example, you probably want pretty low temperature because you want a more deterministic, more consistent response. You don't really care too much about frequency penalty. You can keep that quite low, and the same for presence penalty as well. Whereas if you want to write a creative children's book, then you probably want a really high temperature. You maybe want a higher presence penalty, so it can go off in lots of different directions. And you probably still want a relatively low frequency penalty. So those are kind of different ways in which you can use your output in the end. I think that's pretty much it. So as I say, once you get your model, once it's complete, you'll get an email. You can come back in to our builder, use the model, and then consume it kind of however you want to consume it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mike, for that demo. And I think for anyone kind of I think you did a really great job of showing how the fine-tuned model shows up in the playground, which was kind of, I didn't realize that until I fine-tuned my first model. And that was awesome to see like how easily OpenAI makes it to start playing with that fine-tuned model. And then, I think fine-tuning a model is an art and a science. So you kind of, you're going to fine-tune the model and then based on the results, go back to your prompts and then improve it and kind of the better the prompts, obviously, the better the result is going to be. From what I've found, I don't know if you want to say more about that also.
Yeah, I think one thing to bear in mind is that like it is kind of there isn't any authoritative guidance on a lot of this stuff. So like you won't find a categorical best way to do something. There's just kind of people all working towards the best way, and that's kind of why sometimes like talking to people about what you're doing and being part of communities and things can be the best way to test things out, so you get kind of a hive mind benefit. Generally we've seen with fine tuning that the prompting is less important than the fine tuning. You can, if you've got good quality input data and good quality like prompts in the actual prompt CSV, and by that I mean more like not what you're telling it to do necessarily, but like the data that you're including in the prompt, then what you actually say you want it to do is less important. So one thing that people often want to do, for example, is keep content produced to a certain number of characters. So maybe they want to produce something that's always 1,500 characters. GPT-3, and probably you've seen with ChatGPT as well, basically ignores that. If you consider that it's a language model, it can't count necessarily. So the best way to control your characters is often through giving completion examples that are the right length. So for the tweet me example that we had, the best way of showing something the best way of creating tweets that are going to be under 280 characters is to show it tweets that are under 280 characters rather than trying to force it through tokens or trying to instruct it through the prompt. And this was something that we found, and I think you can see, like, if you try and control it in the playground on a generic model, it just won't work. Whereas if you were to do it through fine tuning, it generally works a lot better.
Cool. No, that makes sense. One question from Brad I'm seeing is about the prompt, a related question about the prompt and the prompts in the spreadsheet is, does it have to be a question prompt for each one, or can it be something more like, this is our mission statement, and then tell it the mission statement kind of afterwards?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a question. If you say wanted to, you could have something, one example I was thinking about, when you go to restaurants and they have like these really flowery, creative ways of describing a dish, you could have a prompt that would just be like, describe this dish. And then maybe you've got like bullets for it's a chicken dish with a tomato sauce and something else. And it's just like, describe that. It's not a question, it's just saying what to do. And then the completion could be like the really flowery way of describing that the chicken is on a bed of spaghetti or whatever else. Like that's an example of something you could do. I think you can also be like really blunt with it. I think people often with ChatGPT are like super polite. They kind of feel like they're talking to a person when you don't really need to be. It's just kind of obviously programming. And so you can actually just structure some data. We have some examples of users who use it in almost a mathematical way, but I kind of hesitate to say a mathematical way because it doesn't work well doing maths, and you shouldn't be using it to kind of make mathematical predictions. But if you wanted to classify something, so say you wanted to group something into a certain category, then it can work very well. So if, for example, you wanted to say you had a business and you wanted to rate how good a website's like headline was, as an example. So you could feed in prompts of just the headlines on one side in the first column, and then in the output you could say very good or good, bad, ugly, whatever, and use that as a categorization rather than like rating it 1 to 5 and trying to get a number out. So using kind of more narrative-based categorizations can be a good way to get output. But yeah, it absolutely does not have to be kind of a question. It just has to be something that the model can learn how to get from prompt to completion. So that's all it's doing. It's just trying to work out how it gets from this thing to this thing. Show me lots of examples of that.
Cool, awesome. And I'm seeing in the Q&A tab one question about is there an upper limit on the number of data that can be trained? The note said to aim for 200, but is there an upper limit, or what would you recommend as you kind of are training models?
So it depends. It's unfortunately like a how long is a piece of string type question. However, like I think with most things, if you were to do kind of 500 examples, then you're going to get a pretty decent result. However, if you are training like a chatbot based on previous conversations, then you might want like tens of thousands potentially, because there can be lots of different variations of the questions that you need to cover. And so in terms of upper limits, I think there's a file size upper limit, which I've got a feeling is something like 80 to 100 meg, which in a CSV is probably like a full million lines in the CSV, I'd imagine. Because I know like we've had people training on about 30,000 lines of data, and I think that's about 2 meg. So I think you'd be hard pressed to kind of hit the upper limits for it. I think one other point actually that's useful to bear in mind is that you see some people trying to make models that are kind of like chatbot based, but then they're worried that it's going to answer a question that's not related to that text. So for example, if you had a customer support chatbot, you trained it on all your conversational data previously, and then a user comes in and tries to ask you like a generic question about like what's the capital of Vietnam. You don't really want it answering that question or like going off on one and people just using it as a way to access GPT-3. It will kind of like burn up your credits and things. So a way, if you're exposing this to people, that you can kind of get around that is to train it how to answer questions that it shouldn't answer. So for example, these are called adversarial examples. And what you do there is to add on like a few hundred questions which are nothing to do with your product. And then your completions would just be something like, I don't know, or something like that. So it learns when it's a random question to just answer with, I don't know. So you can kind of keep it focused. That was just a random thing that we learned the other day.
Cool. That's a great tip on the adversarial training as well. Arn, the question here about sources for training data. The question is giving an example of restaurant menu summaries. Like, do you need to summarize those yourself, or is there a good way of building the library? I have an idea, but curious what Mike you would say to that first.
So firstly, in terms of like where you can find data and stuff, we were thinking about this the other day. Some good sources are Kaggle, which is like a data science challenge site that was owned by, I think it's owned by Google now. But basically, they have tons of like really rich, really well structured data sets that you can start from, whether that be like movie data sets, restaurants, or whatever. So that's a good place to start. The other one is when you're using Google, there's actually a search that you can do where if you put in the term that you want to search for and then put file type : and then XLS or whatever the file type is of like a spreadsheet, XLS or XLSX, then it will just return results which are files rather than actual pages and things. So that's another quick way to get to those examples. In terms of like how you would get from like that restaurant list to some data that you can work with, your options are either to kind of do it manually, or I would, if it was me, I would probably start by using something like GPT-3 or ChatGPT to help make a first cut of that data. So kind of feeding it in almost and saying like summarize this or produce something that's going to be more useful, and then I would curate that data to feed it back in as either completions or prompts. I think that's be the way that I would approach it to start with. I'd be
Right. So kind
interested
of
to hear your idea though. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, like kind of synthetic data using
Mm.
using Chat GPT or OpenAI GPT-3.
Yeah.
You could even there's plugins out there for like Google Sheets where you could even connect to GPT-3 and like have prompts and you could pull it down and create a
Yeah.
bunch of data. And I think that's a great way to kind of get a starting point, and then you manually can kind of go through and remove the ones that aren't good or go from there. But that was one of the things I was going to say.
Cool.
One, I think, interesting question is that I was curious about is as you train your model on these prompts, when you're actually using it, how do you structure the prompts when you're using the fine-tuned models to make sure that you're getting the best responses? Do you have to make sure they're structured similar to the ones it was trained on? Is there anything else to kind of keep in mind there?
Yeah, so I think just as a best practice, you want to use the same kind of prompt that you would use in your fine-tuned data, just because then it's learned that prompt, it's learned that bias basically. So if you had like write me a blog post about X, and then you include the subject, you'd want to use that as the prompt in the actual playground or in Zapier or wherever else. So I think the more consistent you can be, the better results you're going to get.
Cool. We talked a bit about temperature with fine-tuned models already. Is there anything you want to add to that? I just see that's the top voted question, so I'm going to bring that up again real quick.
In terms of what? Sorry.
In terms of how does elements like temperature work with fine-tuned models? I'm assuming it's the same as when you're working with a fine-tuned model, it's going to be the same as with the base model as you were kind of going over in the playground. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. Like I think you probably get less creativity. So, for instance, with TweetMe,
Mhm.
it would create things that were maybe slightly outside of what like I might tweet about, but not as far and as varied as if you just use a generic model. So I think you can be a bit more aggressive with temperatures in fine-tuned models, probably.
Cool. That's good to know. One thing I wanted to get to, which I think is kind of related to some of the questions coming in, is talking about something that you guys are building next with
Mhm.
No Code AI Model Builder, which is embedding,
Yeah.
and kind of talking about the use case for embeddings versus fine tuning, and um, I think some people are talking about can you consume a whole digital copy of a book for fine tuning, and I think embeddings is really the better option there. So maybe talking a little bit about that and some of the differences could be helpful for people.
Yeah, for sure. So fine tuning is excellent when you have examples of something already and examples of like the thing that you want to produce, and a way of kind of instructing it to get to that example. So as we said, like if you want to tailor something to your own voice, you want to write like cold emails, you want to write blog posts, you want to classify something based on some already known way of doing something, fine tuning is perfect for that. If, however, you just want to kind of query a data set and you just want to learn something from a data set, then embeddings is absolutely the option you want to go for. So a good way of kind of explaining it is if you wanted to make like a customer support chatbot, then your two ways of doing it are either using fine tuning, where you're going to have to take thousands of conversations, and let it learn how to respond to customer requests. And in that case, it that can work really well to make it kind of more human in its responses. But you're also at risk of bias from if you have like an aggravated customer support agent and they start being sassy with a customer, then that also gets trained into the model. The other way of doing it is to use embeddings, which is where you would essentially put in like all your policies, guidelines, procedures into you just upload them as like a PDF or a text file or a doc, or we're hoping also to be able to just put kind of a link in, a URL. Click go, and then we're going to be creating a kind of Q&A bot view where essentially you would then type in a question, it would then look for an answer and then structure that in a way that is like very readable for you. So For instance, if you wanted to say you wanted to create something that was like an AI lawyer in some way, you would feed in all of like the legislation for like your jurisdiction, and then what would happen is this embeddings process happens, which in a way is just kind of like breaking up that document and mapping all of the bits of information to some place in space. It then works out what is the kind of relationship between all these points. So when you do your search, it's then saying, okay, I've got an answer for this. What are the closest other points that I can bring in? So it then brings in those kind of chunks of information, and it'll give you those results. So we ask the question about like, what are planning laws in Washington if I want to build like a tree house in my garden? So it looks for that. It pulls back answers, and it will just pull back chunks of text to start with. But then what it does is it puts that then through the Da Vinci model. So you then say like, answer this question the one that you've input using these three like responses that are from the data set that you've input, and then it answers the question in like a very human way. So it's much easier to digest. It's perfect for if you wanted to make like customer support docs, you want to query AI docs, you've probably seen people making like question a book, question the author, question like podcast transcripts, all that kind of stuff is you can be able to do through embeddings. And so it will literally be upload a document and have your bot out the other side. That's how it's going to work.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited for that product to be released. There's currently not a great way to use embeddings with no code tools and kind of build your own app with embeddings without some more technical code. So I think what you all are building there is really, really cool. So we're running another couple minutes here. I just want to kind of thank Mike for taking the time to come and do this session. It was really awesome. I definitely I think it was really interesting to kind of learn more about fine tuning and some of the specifics there, and hopefully it was helpful for all of you as well. If you want to create your own fine tune model, definitely go to no code AI model builder. What's the current URL? And I can put it in the chat also, just to make sure.
Yeah, it's a it's a really catchy one. It's no-code-ai-model-builder.com. So basically hyphens between each word.com. We went for clarity over brevity.
Also, I just put it in the chat, and I'm also going to share it as well with everyone with the recording, so you can go directly to learn more. If you want to learn how to build your own web apps that use AI, you could use these fine-tuned models that you're creating and kind of build your own app that uses text generation or image generation. Check out No Code MBA if you're not a member already. Our building apps with AI course covers everything of how to build an app with Bubble. Even if you've never built an app with Bubble before, never built an AI app, people are really enjoying that course and kind of being able to go from zero to your own text generation app really quickly. And then you'll be able to kind of hook in with the API instead of using the base model for GPT-3. You'll be able to hook into a fine-tuned model here that you build with No Code AI Model Builder. Anything else you want to add or plug, Mike, on your side?
I don't think so. I mean, like if anyone wants to join the Discord, I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. If you are interested in kind of learning a bit more about fine tuning, and I will just say the embeddings product that we're launching, it should be in the next kind of 2 to 3 weeks, but we're currently offering a pre-launch discount where it's going to be $99 for 6 months access. So if you do want to kind of sign up for that in advance, then you'll get a good chunky discount there.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for joining. So until 1 o'clock, we're going to be running a networking session. If you go to the home tab here of the event page, go to networking and then click join one-on-one networking. It's kind of a speed networking type of thing where you'll get matched with someone randomly, be able to chat for 5 minutes, and then talk with someone else. So it'd be a great way to kind of get to know each other, hopefully connect with some other like-minded people. If you have to drop as well, no worries, but hope to see you in the networking. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, follow us on Twitter, and uh, looking forward to the next No Code MBA session. Thank you,
Cool.
everyone.
Thanks, Lessa. Cheers.
All right, thanks.